Hello, everyone. Uh, really appreciate everybody joining us here today to discuss the 2024 Out of Reach report. This is a report that we release in partnership with the National Low Income Housing Coalition every year. What it does is quantify how much renters really need to earn in order to afford a basic two-bedroom apartment. We also compare how much many renters are actually earning, and there's quite a gap when you look at people's rents compared to their incomes there. Amy Regal, our executive director at Ohio, she's going to discuss the details of all that, the findings of the report. She's going to go into as well what the state can do to help address that gap. Um, and then we'll hear from Shamika Smith. She's the Vice President of Housing for Impact Community Action in Columbus. And Shamika is also going to discuss the effect of skyrocketing rents, what is having the effect that it's having on renters and the city's lower income workforce. And then we'll hear from Beth Kowalczyk. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ohio Association of Area Agencies on Aging, otherwise known as O for A. And she's going to talk about how the housing affordability crisis is affecting aging Ohioans. And then at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. So with that, Amy, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for joining us today. So, as Marcus mentioned, this is the report Out of Reach, which each year COHHIO releases in coordination with our national partner, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which is based in Washington, D.C. They prepare this report for all 50 states, and we focus in on the results right here in Ohio. And this year, the report shows that for an individual in Ohio to be able to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment, they need to make $20.81 an hour working full time. And so this is a significant increase from the previous year where the wage was under $20 an hour. And we see that this wage continues to increase across the state of Ohio. The numbers are also broken down in different um, MSAs and counties across the state to show what the wages in specific areas that a person would need to earn to afford a two-bedroom apartment. And I think the most shocking number, although um, a number that many of us feel in this community, is that Columbus has increased to $25 an hour that a person has to earn in order to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment. The number is also higher in Union County, in Cincinnati, in Cleveland than the state average. It is slightly lower in other municipalities across the state to the state average. But what we see is that the wages earned in those areas are also significantly lower. And so there still is this large gap between what people are earning and how much they must pay for housing. And you'll see that of the top 10 jobs in the state of Ohio, the 10 jobs that the most people, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that they hold within the state of Ohio, that of those top 10, only two of them pay enough for a person to afford a modest two-bedroom. The other eight are paying significantly less than what it costs, and that is creating a great divide between what people earn and what they are able to afford. And if we look at different groups across the state of Ohio, what we see is that there are many people whose wages are or whose income i- is fixed or that is predetermined, and it is creating even more pressure on those individuals. So individuals who are receiving Social Security, individuals who may not be able to work full time, individuals who have other costs that are a considerable part of their monthly income, such as individuals who have children who are still in early childhood education and are having to make those payments also. It's getting very, very tight for those individuals to be able to keep up with inflation and keep up with these costs that are accelerating, in some cases, even more than the average consumer index of inflation in the state of Ohio. So there are some actions that have been taken at the state level to be able to address the housing crisis. We did see last year in the budget that they passed the Ohio Housing Tax Credit, that they created Welcome Home Ohio, a program that will help revitalize housing and bring it back into communities. We saw the establishment of the Senate Select Committee on Housing, which toured the state and listened to the needs and of the stories of Ohioans all across the state of Ohio. So we are seeing action. We are seeing movement. We are seeing increased interest in what is happening in housing at the state level. However, what we are seeing is that there still isn't a great interest. There still isn't a lot of dedication of addressing the needs of those who are extremely low income, those who may be on fixed incomes, and those who are the most vulnerable within our communities. In this way, we see that the Senate Select Committee released a report that had 23 recommendations. But of those 23 recommendations, none of them were focused on homelessness. None of them were focused on the extremely low income population, and things like homeowner repair were left out of the recommendations. We also see that sustained sources of funding at the state level, such as the Ohio Housing Trust Fund, have been compromised in the last year in being able to preserve ongoing funding into and renewed funding into that one sustained source of revenue that helps to provide services across the state in every nook and cranny of the state for extremely low income individuals, homeless services, and extremely low income housing development. So as we look at this report, as we see what the data is telling us, these are not isolated stories. This is not just one person, what they think they're feeling on the ground. This is sustained information, sustained data that is being provided to show that there is increased housing instability and that the gap that what a person is earning compared to what they need, that delta is growing bigger and bigger, and that is being felt in our communities. So we hope that this report will show that we've done efforts, that we've taken steps, but there is still a dramatic need across the state of Ohio, and that we cannot wait any longer, that we must act now to address these needs and to help our communities provide the support that is necessary to be able to help people reach housing stability. I'll
Great.
turn it back to Marcus.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. And Shamika, you're up.
Again, thank you so much, Marcus, and to my fellow fighters in the fight. Good morning. I'm Shamika Smith, and I have the privilege of serving as the Vice President here at Impact Community Action. As an organization, we're not new to housing stability. Since our inception over 15 years ago, we've been on the front line of trying to keep people safe in their homes. We serve over 25,000 households annually through our programs. We've seen great strides during the pandemic of keeping people safe in their homes, yet there's still work to do. Today, when we think about housing, homelessness, and building in our community, there is still a deeper level of commitment and collaboration needed. Employers have to decide what their employees need to be able to afford to live where they work. Housing developers and funders need to agree to a standard of affordability, and we're not asking ourselves affordable for who. People decide where they live based on what they can afford, which sometimes does not always align with where they're able to work, and then does not seem to promote the belief that housing is a human right. Let's take into consideration that it is now expensive if you are poor. I'll let us sit with that. It's now expensive if you're poor. It costs more. Everything costs more. Thinking about transportation to get where you need to go. Food, I just went to the grocery store. It's expensive. Childcare, everything is expensive. And this is bigger than a program. This is bigger than any kind of one thing. We're here today anticipating when our nation celebrates Independence Day. And I want to challenge us. I want to challenge us to create and decide about access to affordable and safe housing in our community. I want to challenge us, like, when will we demand that developers and property owners provide housing to everyone? And when will our community and communities call out those that don't set the standard for equity in housing access across this state? We need to prioritize legislation that provides financial resources that help stabilize a family and a community. As one organization, this is really hard, but as a group of people banding together, we can do this. Because when a household has stable housing, the impacts on education, workforce, and health are better. Daily, we hear and we see households who are making below the $25 an hour that need help. These are our bus drivers that drive our children to school. These are our bus drivers that drive public transportation. These are recent college graduates that are looking for jobs. And these are members of the aging population that have a fixed income. We even have staff members who need assistance, who are working 2 jobs in order to provide for their families, and they have recently lost benefits while pursuing full-time employment to create hope and opportunities for self-sufficiency. So today I challenge us, let us all help to create hope for housing stability.
Great. Thank you very much, Shamika. Really appreciate your comments. And Beth, take it away.
Thanks, Marcus. My name is Beth Kowalczyk, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Ohio Association of Area Agencies on Aging. Our mission is to ensure that everyone has the ability to thrive in their homes and communities as they age. Area agencies on aging support older adults with services and supports so that they can age in place for as long as possible. That's what we all want to be able to do, is to remain in our communities and in our homes for as long as possible. But the key to this is to be able to have safe, affordable, and accessible housing. And that's something that we're seeing is increasingly a challenge for older adults, particularly those with fixed incomes who may rely on Social Security. The increases in Social Security and their incomes are not keeping pace with the cost of rent, property taxes, and other things that will impact their ability to remain in their homes. We have a significant number of older adults that are paying more than 30% of income in rent across the state. It's almost 140,000 individuals with the latest data. And with the housing shortage, there are less options available to older adults that will meet their needs as they seek to maybe downsize or reduce their costs after living in a home that is not set up for them as they age. We have seen, even before the pandemic, a huge increase in homelessness in older adults, and it continues. The statistic from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency is that homeless services increased 208% from 2012 to 2018, or from 2012 to 2018. Too many statistics. And we are seeing this. This is borne out in the work that we do, that the individuals we're trying to provide services to are having challenges even having a home. And it's difficult to find housing that also supports you as you age. And so one of the things that we think is incredibly important that has been discussed is the Ohio Housing Trust Fund and the funding for home modifications and repairs. a small cost, one-time cost to modify a home for someone who is aging is an incredible return on investment for them. They can remain in their homes for many years as a result of a ramp or remodeling a bathroom to provide a zero entry shower or and grab bars. Those are things that seem small but make a huge difference to individuals who want to remain in their homes. There are so many things that we are talking about with regard to housing these days. And I think we just want to make sure that people of all ages and abilities are part of that discussion, and that we're talking about affordability and accessibility as part of the discussion as well. Things that we have advocated for are looking at that homestead exemption and how do we update that and ensure that it actually has the impact to support older adults whose income isn't able to keep up with the property taxes that are increasing. Looking at alternative ideas for housing like accessory dwelling units, otherwise known as in-law suites or other things that are an easy way, I think, for communities to be able to look at housing strategies. So we really need to look at a number of different policies to ensure that we can support people of all ages and abilities so that no one will face the issue of homelessness in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Beth. Really appreciate it. And we're willing to answer any questions anybody has. You can either feel free to ask in the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask away. If anybody has any questions, go ahead.
Spencer Hickey with Hannah News Service. There was discussion on how locations people can afford to live don't always align with where they work. What significance does that put on public transit access and funding?
Yes, one of the things that we know is that in the state of Ohio, Jobs in Ohio has been extremely successful over the last handful of years, being able to create economic opportunity in the state. And we are very excited about that success and look forward to those opportunities coming to communities all across the state. I know a lot of times we talk about the exciting developments in Columbus and the surrounding areas, but we see these developments in every corner of the state. And it is true that oftentimes where the jobs are coming, where the jobs are, is disconnected from where people can live and where they can afford to raise their families and where they can thrive within their communities. And so we not only have to think about if the two locations have a distance between them, what are the transportation options, whether that be private vehicle, public transportation, or other sources of mobility. But then also thinking about the fact that even if we can solve for transportation, our lives are not as linear as just waking up and going to work every day and putting in our time on the clock and then going back home. But there's so many other factors that have to go into it: doctor's appointments, getting children where they need to go, picking up that loaf of bread on the way home from the grocery store, helping to care for an aging parent. There's so much that happens. So we do need to think of ways of how communities where the economic opportunities exist also have housing for all members of the community, and that everyone has the ability to live within the community where they work.
Great. Thanks, Amy. Does anybody else have any questions? Maybe while people are thinking about it, I was going to ask you, Shamika, we talked a little bit before about how the cost, the skyrocketing cost of rent in Columbus in particular is creating real challenges for the workforce generally and even specifically for Impact Community Action's workforce. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see from, the managerial perspective there?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. There was an article that came out a couple of months ago that said, in order to afford a home in the community, needs to make around $90,000. Well, if we're honest, as the only community action agency in the county, in Franklin County, where our responsibility is, we don't, our starting wage is at $90,000. So when you think about what our starting wage is, like our starting wage is a little over $18 an hour. We have some staff who have to work multiple jobs in order to be able to afford rent, which, we're seeing right now the average cost of rent for a 2-bedroom is around $1,300. And so when you take into account all the other things that someone has to pay for, $18 is just not enough. And Amy, mentioned it. It's looking like $25 an hour. It was stated that it should be around $21 an hour. But when you think about, our workforce and we hire the people that we serve. That's one of the wonderful things about working in community action and working with individuals with lived experiences. We get the privilege of hiring those that we've served previously, and they become advocates for the work. And so when you think about hiring a former client who then now becomes a coach, or who can become, one of our frontline staff members who may not have experience, we're also a second chance employer. So when you think about someone who may be a returning citizen, when you think about the time span of work, someone may have worked when they're 18 and now, they may be 42 getting back into the workforce. They're not able to get those jobs that are higher wages. And so we're starting them between the $18 and $22 an hour, depending on what the job entails. And then they have to make decisions about, will this work for them based on where they live? And then when you think about the commute, Amy said that, right? You think about taking a bus to work every day, or taking a car and let one nail mess up your tire. I just had to get a tire fixed on Saturday, and it was $70. But I could not imagine what I would have been able to do in order to get to work if I couldn't afford it.
Thank you. Let's see, Spencer, I know has another question, but if anybody else has another question first, go ahead and ask away. And if not, Spencer, we'll leave it to you.
I have a question. I'm Nicole Layton. I'm with the Athens Messenger in Athens, Ohio. And the problem that we have here is that the majority of the properties the rent is based on what the Ohio University students can afford, rather than what the normal working population can afford. So as community members, how can people advocate for themselves to, I guess, have real affordable housing, not what the student population dictates, if that makes sense?
Yes. So I live that conundrum every day. My home is just 2 blocks off of the campus of the University of Dayton. And I have watched my neighborhood go from a almost fully homeowner occupied neighborhood 12 years ago to now being a 50-50 neighborhood of rentals for students, not for other members of our community. They would never be able to afford what the students are able to pay in the 7 months pretty much that they occupy the homes. And so as we look at communities all across Ohio, we are lucky in the state that we have so many higher education institutions that are scattered across the state, but it does create a pressure and a differentiation in the housing. And in smaller communities like Athens or in Oxford, or even in like a Bowling Green, where you have so much of the housing dedicated to the students, and not as much supply for other residents of the communities, it does it does create a unique situation. And so in communities thinking about how there can be more housing development that is dedicated and preserved for populations, whether it be the senior population or individuals with limited income, that those developments can be built and preserved for populations, and also to create robust programming around home ownership. Oftentimes we see some really innovative and deeply subsidized programs that occur in the urban areas to promote home ownership. I think opportunities to spread those deeply, and when I say deep subsidy, it's in down payment assistance, it's in low interest loans, it's in things that help to mobilize more home ownership in those areas, so that those units are also preserved for the owner of the property, not necessarily for an other occupant of those properties.
Thank you. Any other questions before we let Spencer ask away? All right, well, I'll let Spencer go ahead.
Thank you. Would you be able to talk about the effects of expected population growth in the Columbus region on the housing issue, and also potentially Licking County with the Intel sites?
I don't know, do either of, especially with the Columbus perspective?
So, what we see, again, Spencer, thank you for your questions. What we see, and the Michael Wilkos did a wonderful presentation at a Housing for All Summit, where he talked about how the housing market is looking inside of 270 and outside of 270. So what we know about living outside of 270 is it's extremely expensive. And so when we talk about Intel and all these other businesses that are coming, folk who can afford to live on the outside of 270 are actually going to be living on the inside of 270 because it's going to be a bit cheaper. So that means the folk that can afford to live on the inside of 270 will not be able to find appropriate and adequate housing, because individuals who earn more are going to be taking away the housing stock from the low earners. So then you'll have individuals who will be paying more than 30% of their income to be able to afford to live. And quite frankly, they'll probably be having to live somewhere further than where they work. And then when you think about how we're building housing, not as fast as our population growth goes, there will probably be a point where we will have more people than we have housing available. And then when you think about affordable housing, we do not have enough of that. So we will have to make some decisions as a community about what that's going to look like, because I can foresee that some of these other systems will in essence be hijacked, because people won't be able to to be able to maintain the rent, and a landlord will be able to raise the rent to whatever he or she decides to do as a business strategy. Because if I have someone paying 1,100, but I know someone can pay 14, then they can just raise it to 14, therefore pricing out a lot of people who work everyday jobs. And I mean an everyday job like a teacher, an everyday job like a social worker. Like, these are not necessarily high-paying jobs on the front end. And so we will probably see some things that we don't want to see and that we're not really ready to talk about.
As we also talk about population growth, I think one of the things that Beth pointed out earlier is really important to underscore, and that is the conversation about density. And density can feel really scary sometimes, because you talk about density, and I think everyone, even I, will sit there and picture a big high-rise apartment building, and the the ideas of like a New York City or a Chicago or these really congested areas. And I think we have to say we're still going to be Ohio. We're still going to be the unique communities that we are all across the state, and that we can increase density in a very gentle manner. And it can be in a very affirming way to the normal fabric of every community across the state. So maybe in Columbus, especially like in the downtown area, you do see a 20-story apartment building. But in a Licking County or in a Fayette County, or if we're talking about Hancock County, it might be more of the accessory dwelling units. It might be doubles, where it's just 2 units together on one plot for development. It could be, even the 4-unit apartment buildings that from the front have a front porch and they have a backyard and a garage that fits right into the context of the neighborhoods. I think as we think about those gentle ways that we can increase density, that does not take away from the communities that we are. People move to small towns because they want to live in a small town. People move to the mid-major kind of cities because they don't want it to be too overwhelming. We acknowledge that and we want to maintain that feeling and that sense of belonging, but there are very gentle and appropriate ways that we can add more people within every community across the state.
Thank you. One other point I thought of too, when we're talking about some of these major economic development deals that we've seen popping up in Ohio, is the effect on the people that already live there. The phenomenon of displacement, as rents go up surrounding, housing costs go up surrounding the project, and the people that have lived there for a long time see their housing costs go up. So that's another concern that we would, certainly we saw a lot of that around the shale development that happened in Eastern Ohio. So it's something we've also been talking with policymakers about, that we really need to try to figure out how to prevent mass displacement of some of the folks, and particularly a lot of the aging residents that have been there for a long time. So that's another concern we have about, some of these projects that are certainly beneficial in the big picture, but can be complicated when you're looking at the housing picture locally.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I think that the challenge is people do and tend to want to downsize within their community, but there's nowhere to go. And they can't afford to access the housing that's being developed now with the increasing rents and lack of accessibility. And so people remain in their homes for as long as they can, and that may not be feasible. Fortunately, we do have programs that we need to continue to fund and explore how we can expand these programs that help people stay in their homes. But it does have an impact on the availability of housing. But part of that is that people can't find housing to move into. So there's a lot of different components that are impacting this housing crisis.
All right.
Did have one more, which may be for Beth, but the others could answer as well. Can you speak more on the property tax issue Ohio has been facing now, including for people who are on fixed income?
Yeah, so the homestead exemption is available to people, but it is a pretty low level, and it isn't really meeting the needs of people who are now facing these increasing property taxes, and they don't have extra income. They're not receiving raises year after year from Social Security or whatever the fixed income is. So they're having difficulty in being able to pay those property taxes. And I know that adjusting the homestead exemption or putting a freeze on property taxes for particular populations, including older adults who are at a certain income, is something that's been talked about in the legislature, but it really hasn't been moving. There's a number of bills addressing this issue from different aspects, and unfortunately, it hasn't come to fruition, but it's something we really need to be looking at, the impact of increasing property taxes on older adults who are remaining in their homes. This is something that is not, you can't budget for that with a limited income. So it's really important to look at things like the homestead exemption or other ways to address the issue.
And there are also programs available at the auditor's office and the local county auditor's offices. There are programs available to help with property taxes that a lot of individuals do not know. We actually had a program through the pandemic. The program is no longer up and running right now, and our auditor, Franklin County office, and the treasurer's office actually shared with us that a lot of people were losing their home because of minimal property taxes that they owed. And again, that has everything to do with income. So we were able to assist a couple hundred households maintain the homes that they owned, because of back property taxes, which was less than $10,000. And so at the auditor's office, as well as local treasurer's offices, there are some programs available to help with some of those property taxes.
And just real quick, we also have been able to take advantage of some flexible funding that was made available in the last state budget called Healthy Aging Grants. And these were grants that have been, and they're currently now, the programs are being implemented, but they allow counties to address local needs. And this is incredibly important because people have different needs in different counties, but for older adults, and the area agencies on aging have been partnering with counties. One of the things that they are using these Healthy Aging Grants for is to help assist in paying property taxes, similar programs to what Shamika was talking about.
Great. Thank you, guys. If anybody has any more questions, ask away. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And I will be available if anybody thinks of any other follow-up questions. And otherwise, just a sort of a heads up to everyone out there. We're also at COHHIO. We are keeping an eye on some of the Supreme Court decisions coming out in anticipation of one on the Grants Pass case, which involves basically the ability of cities to arrest and ticket people experiencing homelessness. It's concerning for us, so that might be something that you see, and we're welcome, available to comment on that if you have any questions, if you want to get into that issue as well. So that might be coming today. We don't really know. It was the Grants Pass case, Johnson versus Grants Pass, out of Oregon. And that could have a significant impact on the way that cities approach homelessness. So with that, thank you so much, Beth, Shamika, and Amy, and everyone that joined from the media. We appreciate your coverage and happy to work in the future and follow up with any questions you might have. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.